Hello guys, Crispy here, welcome back to another video. In this one, my friends, I'm gonna be testing a GeForce GTX 1650 in Assassin's Creed Shadows, this time with the ultra-low settings preset. They actually did it, guys. It seems like they optimized some things, reduced the settings a bit to accommodate for these 4GB GPUs and lower-end stuff like the 1650. This is actually the recommended GPU for this new preset, so let's try it. This one is the Gigabyte Mini ITX OC model of the card. It's also a 4GB GDDR5 version, and I'm not manually overclocking it. You can see all of its specs right here in Tech Power-Ups GPU-Z, and over on left, I'm pairing it with the i5-12600KF and 32GB of RAM to avoid CPU bottlenecks. Let's get into it, shall we? Alright, let's go over the settings first. I am starting at 1080p resolution using TAA native and the low preset. As you can see, now we have very low and ultra low. I actually tested the low preset in the last video. I just want to launch it here to check it out and then use the ultra low and see the differences in FPS and quality. And it seems like it's pretty much the same thing as the last time around. We got like 19, 20 frames per second, sometimes 22. But yeah, nothing really changed in terms of optimization here. If anything, it's maybe consuming a bit more VRAM and the frame time isn't as flat as the last time. There is a bunch of vegetation still. I think I complained about this, you know, the low settings or very low settings preset previously weren't low enough, in my opinion, for these old GPUs and low-end GPUs to be able to play this game well, and it still has a lot of vegetation and so on. So, doesn't look terrible, does it? Even though it's low settings. The performance, however, is absolutely atrocious, but that's expected, I guess, from a 1650 and a game like Assassin's Creed Shadows. That's very, very demanding. But let's see what changes when we select the ultra-low settings preset. Also, take a look at the VRAM budget there. It's at 4.8 basically, and lowering it down to ultra low puts it at 4 gigabytes, 4.1. It's still above what we have available here on the 1650, unfortunately, but yeah, I don't know. Anyway, ray tracing is still on low. Can't disable that. Yeah, it's set to diffuse hideout only, so it's disabled in most of the game world anyways. No problems. And I think there is one setting that can still go lower than the ultra low preset. Yeah, it's this one right here under lighting. Screen space effects on very low, and there's still an ultra low setting there. Everything else is set to the absolute minimum right now. Let's apply that. We'll need to restart the game. And now, supposedly, according to the requirements page, we should be seeing a 1080p 30 FPS experience. Hopefully, coming from like 19. This is still pretty bad. Okay. I mean, maybe with the GDDR6 version of the card, you'd be closer to 30 FPS, and I guess maybe out in the open we will get 30 FPS, but here in the city area we still see very low FPS. It's not teens, at least. It's not a bad improvement in frame rate. I mean, from 20 FPS to 25 FPS, it's a big 25% increase in performance, so I'm not too mad about that, or it's 33% increase, something like that. It's a big increase, okay, but it's still not enough to play at native 1080p resolution, in my opinion, at least with the GDDR5 version of the GTX 1650, guys. Maybe with a bit of an overclock. You know what? Let's do that. Let's do 200 megahertz on the core clock and 500 megahertz on the memory clock. This should be achievable by pretty much all of... Nope, never mind. It crashed. It was a big overclock, I guess. Okay, so I set it to 150 on the core clock and 250 on the memory clock. Otherwise, it would crash a little bit, and still pretty much the same experience in terms of FPS. 25, 22 sometimes, so 10 to 30% faster than what we saw previously, I guess, maybe a little bit higher than that sometimes. But even the overclock doesn't really save the little GTX 1650 4GB GDDR5. The shadow quality is noticeably worse right now compared to what we saw previously, guys. It's super shimmery at the distance, and the draw distance of it Well, it's not the draw distance, but the LOD looks pretty terrible as well. And it looks like a low frame rate shadow over there, like 5 FPS shadow. There's some popping on the clothes of people as well that I can notice. But I mean, it's ultra low setting, so I expect these things to be issues, you know? And over here, though, we still got a ton of grass. So I believe if they had disabled the grass, or at least most of the grass, it would improve performance by a bit more, for sure. Although over here in forest areas we can indeed get those sweet 30 frames per second that they were telling us about in the system requirements page, so sometimes it drops into the 20s. But yeah, I guess this is now an ultra low-end GPU, and 25 plus FPS is not too bad on a new AAA title at 1080p native resolution. Remember, we're still at 1080p native resolution, so lowering it down to like 720p or 900p resolution, or using some FSR or XeSS, it will definitely increase our frame rate from 30 FPS, possibly into the 40s maybe? I don't know, we'll see in just a little bit. But yeah, those average FPS are right in line with what they told us in that requirements page. So yeah, 30 average around here. Unfortunately, Roach is bugged, so he's not coming for some reason. I don't know if he died or not. I don't understand. I keep calling Roach and he just doesn't show up. He refuses to. Anyway, let's stop it there and let's try it with FSR first. And I'm gonna use FSR quality, which basically renders the game at 720p resolution and then upscales it to 1080p. And over here, I do wish the FSR implementation was better because it's still really crappy in this game. But we went from 24 FPS in this scene right here to 30 FPS, 28, 30 FPS. So that's a decent improvement. Once again, this is, I guess, playable now. I will call it playable, guys. Even though the graphics are a bit too low end for me, I don't really like it right now because it's very pixelated. FSR quality does that in this game. Pixelates everything. It's super noisy as well. Does that in a lot of games, you know. But this one isn't really a very good implementation. Hello, Roach! Finally, I found you! What were you doing? Why weren't you coming towards me? Why is this guy bugged? Ask him. He's your friend. You speak deer-ish, I guess. No, not really. Anyway, never mind. Yeah, the shadows are a bit flickery as well sometimes. But that's something that I expect from ultra-low settings, once again. And around this area, things are definitely a lot better. Instead of getting 30, 31 FPS, we're now up into the high 30s with 35 on average. That's pretty good. And although it's really pixelated with the FSR quality upscaler here, and I don't like it, again, for someone playing with a GTX 1650, with like a small 1080p display, one of those 16-inch displays, I guess, or maybe even a 22-inch display. I'm using a 27-inch one, so PPI is pretty high already, and it doesn't look very good with FSR. But on a smaller display, it would look decent. You know, I commend the developers. The game's not really that well optimized, doesn't run very well, honestly, but the fact that they cared enough to introduce an ultra-low settings preset, I like to see that stuff. That's something that I complained about once again, saying that the low settings maybe looked a bit too good. Alright, so it required a little bit lower settings preset, in my opinion. And they did just that, so I'm happy about it, guys. Over here, it seems like we have ping or something, even though this is not an online game, but yeah, it's very weird indeed. No frame generation is being utilized either, so it's just the game itself. I've noticed that with other GPUs as well recently. At least 12-year-old me would find this very playable of an experience. I used to play games at like 20 or 25 FPS back then, so yeah, this would be nice, to me at least. I would still not buy the game at full price with the GTX 1650 because the game costs more than your GPU, but still, I like to see this stuff. Now, this game works really well with frame generation as well. However, this is not DLSS frame generation. We can't have that with a GTX GPU, and this is FSR frame generation, which is a little bit more input laggy. It has more input lag than DLSS FG. However, it's not terrible right now. Do we have reflex in this game, by the way? Let me check out these options right here. I don't think there is Nvidia reflex available in this game, guys. Yeah, I think Nvidia reflex would definitely improve things a little bit more in terms of the input lag experience. Yeah, this is a bit too slow. I don't like it. Even though it's better than some other titles when... Look at that. It looks like ping once again. But even though the frame generation works better in this game than it does in other games, and it's not anywhere near as input laggy as in other games, especially with a baseline FPS of 30 or 28 sometimes, it's still doable in a way, especially with a controller. But I don't think this is the way to go, guys. Obviously on YouTube it will look smoother to you guys because you're not feeling the input lag right now, and yeah, it's 50 FPS. Sometimes it can reach 60 FPS, I guess, around here. Yep, there we go. That's pretty impressive, but the baseline FPS is way too low for us to enable frame generation. It also fixes the frame time graph a little bit, by the way. It's way flatter than it was before, so that's an improvement, of course, in terms of stability, but the input lag just kills the experience to me. I'm gonna try some XeSS as well on quality. Yeah, okay, so quality XeSS is definitely a lower resolution than FSR quality, so this is probably closer to like 540p internally than 720p internally. And that's why we're seeing higher FPS here, 40s. It also, I'm not sure if it does look better than FSR. I mean, in a way it does, because it's not as noisy, but it's also more over-sharpened and more oil painting look, you know? It has that really weird look to it. I think on a smaller monitor, though, it might look better than FSR, but on a 27-inch display, again, it's less noisy, but it's also a little bit weirder in terms of the edges of everything here. It looks over-sharpened and weird. But yet, it is getting us those 30-plus FPS all of the time. So I think it's a trade-off worth taking, especially compared to native resolution and FSR here. Oh my. Seriously, like the lag-looking animation, the horse just going like this, is making me a little bit mad. It's putting me off a bit, honestly speaking. Also, I thought there would be a lot less grass. Once again, I keep saying this, but I think the grass is the same as very low settings or low settings preset. But they definitely improved the frame rate, so it started to rain as well. But yeah, this time around it doesn't really drop into the 20s anymore, even with the GDDR5 1650. So I like that. It's not too terrible of an experience. However, it just looks really off to me with XeSS. So I'm gonna go back to TAA here. Let's do TAA quality, which is the built-in upscaler in the game. Oh wow. Yeah, I completely forgot, but TAA quality is the best out of the three upscalers. Oh my gosh, it is blurry, but it's not more blurry than XeSS and FSR, and it's less noisy than FSR. And it's also less intensive than FSR. We're here inside of the city getting 30 plus still, so if you want to keep that native 1080p resolution for the HUD and the menus and so on, and you want to use upscaling on top of it, TAA quality is the way to go. This is why I didn't test FSR or XeSS in the previous video that I made. But a lot of people actually complained about that. So here we go. Now I've showed you FSR, XeSS, and TAA quality. And I mean, performance per quality of the graphics ratio, this is definitely the way to go. Once again, not dropping a ton of frames. Over here, 30 FPS, 29. Still drops into the 20s, but it's only for a split second anyways. I don't really care about that too much. Now I'm gonna go back to native AA here with the TAA stuff again. and I want to check it out on 900p resolution. Some people actually asked me to test it out at 900p. I'm just going to reload the previous save because it's getting dark here in this one. And here we go. This is native 900p resolution. Much better looking now with this time of the day. Yeah, when this game starts getting dark, if you don't have ray tracing enabled, or if you have it in diffuse hideout only, which doesn't enable it here, it starts looking pretty bad in my opinion, guys. But during the day, with the blue skies, just like it is right now in Portugal. Actually, today it's a bit cloudy, but yesterday, for example, it was really nice. Like, the weather recently has been really good, and that's why I haven't been posting more often, because it gets like to 35 degrees inside of my room here where I record. I'm waiting to go to the other house and the other studio, but we still gotta wait from some things, bureaucracies and so on. Yeah. I've been waiting for 5 months already. Can't wait to go there and actually have a decent setup with good temperatures in the room, because this is a bit unbearable sometimes. But yeah, anyway, it doesn't matter. Right now we're testing a 1650. This doesn't hit up anywhere near as much as the 5090. Anyway, this seems playable to me once again at 900p resolution native. This is with TAA and 100% resolution scale. 30 FPS. Doesn't feel amazing, obviously, especially if you're used to 60, but again, for someone running a GTX 1650, not terrible, right? It gets 30 plus FPS inside of the city here, so it means that outside of the, or 29 plus FPS, I guess, inside of the city here, outside of the city, it will get you those 30 plus all of the time. And it doesn't look terrible. So if you're running a native, that was flickering way too much there, a native 900p monitor, this is pretty decent. What is going on with that person? I thought he was butt naked, but no. Whoa, holy crap, look at that LOD. What if I get really close to him or her? Okay, it's only here that the inner clothes don't come out of the outer clothes. Alright. Anyway, let's stop it there. This is decent. I think at 720p resolution it will be even more decent, of course, but let's use quality TAA first. Not going to use FSR or TAA anymore, because again, this is definitely better looking. And now we're up into the 40s. Roach! Roach! He's still bugged, guys! Roach is still bugged. Come on! Oh, there he is! Wait, I just held X right now. Maybe... I just discovered I've been doing it all wrong. I just reminded myself that if you do this, you're calling enemies and the enemy's attention, and if you hold it, you actually call Roach. So Roach wasn't bad this whole time. I was.
I'll need to remember that.
Anyway, this is 30 plus all of the time here. If you don't mind using the TAA on quality, it works pretty well at 900p resolution. That's the thing, like, 900p monitors are also smaller than 1080p monitors, so PPI might be higher or the same, and you might not be able to notice that you're running upscaling. Honestly, I was expecting maybe a little bit more of a difference in terms of visual fidelity compared to the low settings preset that we had before, and maybe a bit more FPS at the same time, but I'm happy, guys. I'm not complaining here. This is going in a good direction. I like what Ubisoft did here. Alright, let's not complain. More games should definitely do that. Introduce ultra-low settings presets for people running 1650s, 1050 Ti's and stuff like that. Anyway, this is it now, 720p resolution. Also at 720p, yeah, we're definitely in the area of maybe if we enable frame generation, it's going to be good. So I'll try a little bit of frame generation on top of this now, later actually. Start counting the frame rate. Yes. Yeah, it still drops into the 30s. So in these scenarios where it drops into the 30s, frame generation would still feel really crappy. But outside of here, with 40 FPS baseline, it's going to feel pretty decent, I think. So we're finally arriving at a good frame rate baseline, or at least a minimum acceptable baseline FPS to enable frame generation on top of. Anyway, we're getting very similar FPS to what we saw with TAA quality and 900p resolution previously. So if you're wondering about how many FPS we'd get when enabling frame generation on top of TAA quality plus 900p, well, it's going to be pretty much the same as when I enable frame generation right now. Oh, I just remembered. Can we use FSR on top of TAA? Yes, we can. It's FSR 3.1. Good. Doesn't look like that, actually. It looks like FSR 2 or so. Anyway. Here we go, guys. Frame generation with 40 FPS baseline, which is what we were getting. Once again, this actually doesn't feel bad by any means. The input lag is acceptable right now. So moving around in these forest areas, you can get that smooth frame rate, 60 FPS frame rate with decent input lags for a single player title like this one. Obviously the graphics are still on ultra low, so it's not amazing. But yeah, at least it looks smooth and it feels smooth. That's definitely not the case when you enable frame generation in some other titles, most of them. You know, if you have 38 or 40 FPS baseline and you enable FG in other games, it feels like complete crap. And it's not playable to me. But in this one, it is playable. Yeah, I think it's only when we get to the city that it will start becoming an issue in terms of input lag. You can also get used to it, obviously. If you're someone who doesn't care much about input lag, it's still going to be fine. But yeah, over here, starting to drop into the low 60s and the high 50s in terms of the frame rate here with the frame generation. Yeah, it doesn't feel as good, although right here it's still in the upper 60s, so that's not too bad at all. I thought it was going to be worse. I thought it was going to drop into the 50s more often than it is, so surprising. Over here, however, it's below 50 FPS. Like, this area is really intensive. This is why I always start here in the benchmark runs to showcase worst case scenario right away. Yeah, going in this direction, it's always below 60 frames per second, so it feels really bad in terms of input lag, but still, I can't be too mad. We got options here, right? If you want stability in terms of frame rates, if you want smoothness, you can enable frame generation and have that. Play with the controller, it's going to be fine in terms of input lags. If you want a faster input lag experience and more responsive experience, although with a little bit more jittery of a frame time graph, you can just utilize it without frame generation. Play at native 720p with the ultra low settings preset, and it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be playable, and it's not gonna drop from 30 FPS. So with that said, guys, I think that's been it. Maybe we can try it at like quality here as well, although this is going to be way too low of resolution internally, right? Here we go, 47, 46. Yeah, although it's too pixelated now. It looks really bad. I think I would take the 10 FPS hit, like 5 FPS hit, it's more like 5, right? And play with TAA native AA and 720p native, then this. This is 66% of 720p, so it's really low resolution internally. Shadows are even lower resolution right now, and it just looks ugly, honestly. Although this is the best baseline FPS that we've seen so far to enable frame generation on top of. So if you have a 7-inch display, like a Steam Deck display lying around without the Steam Deck itself for some reason, you could enable frame generation and then it's going to look good probably. And very smooth at the same time, and responsive as well. So that's been it, guys. Thanks very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. I'll catch you in the next one very soon. Let me know if you're interested in seeing more low-end GPUs here in Assassin's Creed Shadows with this new ultra-low settings preset. And I'll catch you tomorrow. Love you all. Bye-bye.